If the adult child is making the decisions or in a position to make more of the decisions for their parent, they need to take a step back and always answer the question, is this what my parent would want or need? Not, is this what I feel comfortable with?
Hello, I'm Dina, an account executive here at Advisor Investments, and I want to welcome you to another Advisor You Can Talk To podcast. Today we're talking about the sandwich generation and the financial decisions and responsibilities that many of them are taking on. So who are they? The sandwich generation refers to a generation of young to middle-aged adults who are sandwiched, so to speak, between caring for their aging parents while also raising their own children. I'm joined by my colleague, Claudine Schrock, who's an account executive here at Advisor Investments. She works with clients in a relationship capacity, having regular discussions about elder planning. She's very passionate about the topic. She's worked with many families and has personally dealt with this situation as well. She's noticed that this has become a more frequent topic that's coming up, and she wanted a solution to make things easier. So she created a comprehensive guide to help with these changing family dynamics. Claudine, why don't you summarize the steps for us, and then we can dive deeper into each one of them?
It is a very important discussion, Dina, but if you can handle these 4 steps, you can be successful. 1, you need to get to the conversation with your aging parents. 2, you need to organize. 3, you need to take action. And 4, you need to follow through.
Well, I'm eager to get started, so let's dive into the first step, getting the conversation started. Now, in some instances, I believe the aging parents will realize that they need help and they'll initiate the dialogue, but that's not always the case. Claudine, tell us a little bit more about that, some of the challenges and things to keep in mind.
Sure. So it can be a very difficult conversation from both the adult child's perspective and the adult parent's perspective. From the adult child, they could be thinking, am I capable of making these decisions? Am I taking away my parents' voice if I take on more responsibility for them? From the aging parent's perspective, am I ready to give up control? Am I being a burden to my children? And again, we're dealing with legal decisions, financial decisions, acknowledging mortality can be very, very emotional, hot topic conversations. But you'll know your family dynamic a lot better than we will. But these 3 approaches that we've used with many families over the past, we found to be super successful. The first approach is to just take a very non-confrontational manner about this conversation.
Yeah. So for instance, you talk to your mom and dad and say, hey, mom and dad, I just met with my advisor or with my estate planning attorney. We had a conversation and I learned that, such and such. It was very helpful. When was the last time you talked to your advisor or you talked to your estate planning attorney?
Exactly. Approach 2 is a little bit more challenging, and that's essentially to just keep the window open. It's not necessarily a one and done conversation when you're bringing this up to aging parents.
So what does that sound like, Claudine?
So that could be something along the lines of, just addressing it right off the bat. Mom and dad, I can tell you're uncomfortable with this conversation. I'm visibly uncomfortable with this conversation, but because I love you and I'm trying to act as your agent if and when you're not able to speak up for yourself, I have to know what your wants and wishes are so that I can take care of you. So let's table it for now. Now's not the right time. Let's agree to have this conversation again in 6 months, see if anything's changed. Can I at least get your agreement on that? Mm-hmm. So again, keep the window open. It's not a one and done, but try to keep the momentum going.
Right.
Because it is so important to have this conversation. And the third approach is to cue the fall guy.
So that would be us, you and myself, or an estate planning lawyer.
Absolutely. So some of the families that we help have found it to be very powerful to bring in a third party objective voice into this conversation. So the heat is taken off of their shoulders. It's not directly coming from the children, where there might be some disagreement or animosity for the parents to actually understand this conversation and to listen to it. So we've found it's been helpful to have us come in and kind of be the third party voice of reason, calming voice. We could use many adjectives to kind of describe how we help folks.
This actually reminds me of a family that we worked very closely with. It was an aging couple. Their children had moved across the country, and they started realizing that their parents need a little bit of help. The parents were not open to the conversation when the daughters tried to initiate that dialogue. Mm-hmm. And it took a little bit of time, and every now and then, the daughters would try to reopen it, kind of keep the window open, try to encourage their parents to talk to them, to be open to maybe some changes. They were not. And then eventually there was a medical issue. The father actually had a fall, was in the hospital for a while. When he got out of the hospital, both he and his wife realized that they needed a little bit of help. And they were open to having the daughters come in. The daughters, of course, involved us. And with us helping with some of the structuring and working with the estate planning attorney as well, we tried to make sure that from a financial and legal perspective, everything was set up for them. We were able to give the daughters peace of mind and just help that transition kind of move along smoothly. So now that the conversation is initiated, what does the planning look like and what are we trying to accomplish?
So we're going back to step number 2 here, the organizational piece. And my advice to you listening is to certainly, if there's multiple family members, or maybe if your family is not always on the best terms, to have a private conversation with your parents to just kind of get an idea of the lay of the land. And what that means is to review from a legal perspective what has been done or what needs to be updated. For example, is there a personal representative named in their documents? Is there a power of attorney in their documents? When was the last time they reviewed their estate plan with their attorney? From an investment perspective and from a financial perspective, where is everything held investment-wise versus cash accounts? Can anything be consolidated to save everyone some collective time and energy? Do any registrations need to be changed on the existing accounts? From a healthcare perspective, again, this ties in with the legal situation, but is there a healthcare proxy named if and when someone needs to make decisions for your parents if they're not able to? Do you know who the doctors are? Do you know what medications they're on? From a technological perspective, since in this day and age, a majority of us do live our lives online, email, bank accounts, memberships, etc. If we need to get onto any of those accounts for our parents, how do we do that? Do we know where the passwords are? Is that feasible? And then just a step that I think gets overlooked quite frequently, it's to deal with the softer side, the emotional side. But from a daily living perspective, can they live successfully in their home and age in place? Do renovations need to be taken into consideration if they want to stay? Do we need to get home health aides and pets? Who takes care of them if there's an emergency? So we can go down a rabbit hole of different conversations here, but those are just kind of the high gloss from 30,000 feet, things to just think of and organize right off the bat.
This is where a checklist would be very helpful, and we actually have one linked to the description of the podcast. Remember that this is going to be a work in progress, so you'll be adding things to it as different things pop up, but it will keep you on track. Definitely helpful. Having a plan in place is great, but how do you ensure that it's adhered to and who takes accountability?
What I would recommend is having a family agenda prior to getting other family members involved that you can share ahead of time, folks can process. And of course, when you're having these conversations with multiple family members, you can make edits, notes, and so forth. This is also important when there's multiple family members, whether it's siblings, nieces, nephews, etc. If there are multiple goals we're trying to accomplish for an aging parent, essentially to spread out the wealth of the burden across multiple family members. And this allows folks to read the agenda, process it, and raise their hand and designate their own roles as opposed to being forced into something that they might not be comfortable with. And this reminds me specifically of a woman we help. She's in her 90s. We'll just call her Dolly for purposes today. She has multiple properties, one up here in the Northeast region, one down in Florida, and she herself herself is blessed with multiple children who are all actively involved in her care. She's also visually impaired, so that requires a high degree of commitment from her children to help her, just do her day-to-day activities as well as to manage her household, so on and so forth. And in this situation, none of the children had raised their hands and said, you know what, I want to jump in as the CFO, as the alpha child, and essentially manage my other siblings to make sure that everything is being taken care of for Dolly and her family. So unfortunately, she had noticed, and we had noticed separately, that throughout this transition, some items had fallen through the cracks, which had pained Dolly very greatly. This allowed us to step in to help provide further value, to give her peace of mind, and we said, you know what, Dolly, let us be the alpha child. We already know your family in quite a good detail. We know your situation. We know what you're looking to accomplish and what your wants, needs, and desires are. Let us help you further and be that alpha child and check in with your children every so often. Call into the family meetings when you have them and just provide that additional level of protection for you. So that's another way to approach it if maybe, none of the kids are raising their hands to be that essential CFO. And then, of course, back to my earlier point, if you're meeting consistently and you're reviewing agenda, just make sure that someone's updating that and it's shared appropriately with the rest of your family. So for future risk mitigation or changes, everything is accomplished in a timely fashion and shared appropriately.
So we've focused quite a bit on a lot of topics here, but you raised a good point now. It's important not to lose sight of the emotional impact that this kind of transition can take on both the aging parents as well as the adult children. What tips and advice do you have for us that can help the parents retain some of their independence and not feel like they're putting all the burden on family members?
Right. So from a bias reference, if the adult child is making the decisions or in a position to make more of the decisions for their parent, they need to take a step back and always answer the question, is this what my parent would want or need? Not, is this what I feel comfortable with? Which is just how we're naturally programmed and can be difficult to train yourself to do. From the adult parent's perspective, if they want to continue to keep their independence and not have to burden their children or call their children or family members with issues, there's a plethora of services available to folks this day and age based on technology. So for example, if you just pick up your smartphone that's handy and you look in your App Store or your Google Play Store, you can use an app for just about anything these days. Ride-sharing apps if you're not driving and you need to get around. There's an app called TaskRabbit if you need to get chores or errands done. There's also medical apps out there to share information on a real-time basis with other family members if there is some sort of medical event happening, which has been very helpful from what we've heard from the clients we help. But on a more traditional level, if you prefer to talk to someone in person or call someone over the phone, if you're maybe not so tech friendly, we have a ton of clients who've worked with South Shore Elder Services because they're local in the Boston area that have just raved about that. Also, additionally, we help families all across the U.S. and have heard wonderful things from similar services at, say, the VA administration or AARP. So if you want to keep your independence and do this, you have the resources to do so. And one other thing that I wanted to mention is that even if we are having these conversations and say the adult child is more present in the conversations, it doesn't mean that the parent has to be cut out. So for example, we work with a woman who is in the New York area. She's close to 90 years old, wonderful woman, totally with it. But she just, for her benefit and to reduce her anxiety, she's brought her son on as power of attorney, and he's been very involved in her decisions and the conversations since this happened from a legal perspective. And when we have conversations with both of them. It's very transparent, and she has the ability to raise her hand and tap out if it's too much of the minutia and she doesn't want to be bothered and she would just rather have her son do it. So again, use your kids as agents, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you lost your voice and you're cut out completely and you don't have any say.
Well, I think the takeaway here is, in general, we're living a lot longer thanks to medical advancements. Statistics are showing now that more adult children are finding themselves in this sandwich position, and so it's crucial to approach this with as much preparedness as possible. Claudine has done a great job outlining a very simple approach to this transition. If we follow the 4 steps, that would be a great start. Just to recap those, it's important to get a conversation started, approach it with an organized way, take action, and then review that action at least, twice a year, maybe, just to make sure that everything is on track.
Or I'd even say as frequently as possible if there's some sort of medical or mental change.
Right. That's a good point. This is a big topic, and it can be a difficult one. We've helped so many families through it. It's just really key, very important to have the conversation, before it gets too late. This has been Dina Milne, and I've had the pleasure of speaking with Claudine Schrock. We thank you for listening to another Advisor You Can Talk To podcast. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to our show. You can also check us out at www.advisorinvestments.com/podcasts. If you have any topics that you'd like us to explore, please send us an email at info@advisorinvestments.com. We'd love your feedback and to hear back from you. Thank you.